Hello and welcome to Lunchtime Politics, reaching you live from our global headquarters here in the nation's commercial nerve center, Lagos, Nigeria. I'm Jeffrey Uzonga. Let's get you through the big stories in politics and in the polity. Let's get started with the headlines. To hold or not to hold, the People's Democratic Party festering conundrum casts shadow over the party's weekend-planned national convention. President Bola Tinubu tasked journalists to be bold in their reportage, but puts national interest first. Thanks again for joining us on the program that gives you that all-access pass to happenings in the polity and in politics. But the place we will get started is perhaps one of the biggest confusion in our political history happening right now as we speak. The People's Democratic Party. It's literally a house divided against itself, a house of commotion. There are literally no words to describe what is playing out in the People's Democratic Party. Now, if you've been watching channels television in the last few minutes or in the last few hours, you see that the same political party are running advertorials on the National Convention. One from Sam Anyanwu, the National Secretary of the party, apologizing to members of the party and the audience like you and I to say, the National Convention billed for Saturday and Sunday has now been shifted, given to a court or due to a court order, following a court order, and cited two court orders or court judgment. The first was that of Justice James Omotosho, and the other one was from Justice Peter Lifo. Well, while we're still processing that, we can tell you that another release has also come through, this time from the Publicity and Communication Subcommittee of the People's Democratic Party. I'm going to read what it says. The PDP and the National Convention Organizing Committee hereby informs all delegates, party leaders and stakeholders and the general public that drawing from the ruling of the High Court, I think that's the State High Court in Oyo, and there being no pronouncement to the contrary by any court of higher jurisdiction, 2025 National Convention of our great parties proceeding as scheduled on Saturday and on Sunday in Ibadan, the Oyo State capital. Party members, INEC, security agencies, and the general public should disregard all sponsored media announcements to the contrary. One political party, two media announcements. Who should we stand by? Which one should we listen to? Very soon, at some point of the program, we're going to see visuals coming from Oyo State, where the pro-convention team are already putting together. The venue is getting set for Saturday and Sunday. But what we're saying here is that we don't know what the future of the People's Democratic Party is looking like right now, because from the NWC, perhaps one of the most confused NWC I've seen in recent time, the chairman will be saying A, the secretary will be saying B, the national publicity will say C, the deputy national publicity will say D. Just a confusion on all sides. And then it looks like it's going to be an interesting weekend as far as the People's Democratic Party is concerned. So the campaign is going on as to whether it will hold or it will not hold. But we're going to just keep watching the space as much as possible to see what plays out eventually with the fate of the People's Democratic Party. I tried to reel out data between 2013 to 2014, preceding 2015 election. Between then and now, about 12 governors, about 11 to 12 governors have left the party. Rotimi Amechi and what I call the five that left and joined the APC at the formation of the APC. Then we have Bello Matawale, Ben Ayade, Dave Umahi, Umoino, Sheriff Oborowore, Peter Mba, and then we now have Doyediri of Bayelsa State. So all of this lost not to an election, but purely due to, defection. So it's an interesting time for the People's Democratic Party. But let's move on from that. We're following up on what's playing out in Ibadan, the Oyo State capital, as to how the preparations are going and what the signals, the Wadata House, which is their national secretariat, is literally under lock and key. So what exactly is going on? Well, it's a political program. That's why we're following up that development as much as possible. But let's tell you, the president is tasking news editors and journalists to discharge their responsibilities with strong sense of national unity. He gave the charge when he declared open the 21st conference of the Nigerian Guild of Editors held at the State House in Abuja, describing the role of editors in the sustenance of democracy as central and indispensable. The president says he welcomes constructive criticism.
As editors and managers of the national information space, you shape narratives, you influence public understanding, you decide what becomes national focus and how our collective challenges are interpreted. The weight of that responsibility is extremely significant. It must be exercised with wisdom, fairness, and a strong sense of national duty. Yes, we are challenged by terrorism, banditry, and others. We recognize that. Are we doing something about it? Are we inspiring the armed forces? Are we encouraging them to fight? They put their lives on the line to defend the national sovereignty of this country. It is our responsibility.
So that was President Bola Tinubu giving the charge to the Guild of Editors. Let's also tell you what had played out in the Senate, resolving to investigate ongoing delineation exercise conducted by INEC in Warri Federal Constituency of Delta State following alleged marginalization and irregularities raised in the petition before the upper chamber. The resolution followed a motion sponsored by Senator Simon Lalong from Plateau South. In his lead debate, Senator Lalong said the motion was informed by a petition from Ishekiri ethnic nationality forwarding to the Senate Committee on Electoral Matters, alleging unjust treatment and marginalization of Ishekiri people in the recent INEC ward delineation exercise.
In the alleged delineation exercise, two communities, Baramatu and Oporoza, which that you had 1 ward each, have been increased to 8 wards out of 19 created in Warri Southwest. However, the Ishekiri community, which had 6 wards previously, had been reduced to 5 wards.
A group of people have taken INEC to court in respect of the outcome of the delineation. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, I think that this matter should be rested and allow due process to continue in the courts.
The reference, even from the villa, is not a hidden document.
Is somebody that is guiding this motion from what he has said?
No, he's an interested party.
No, don't talk. Senator Joel,
allow the Senate to...
We also should not lose sight of the point made by the distinguished Senator Joel Onowako that this matter is before the court.
All right, let me bring in my guests. And we've talked a lot about politics, about altercations back and forth. But it's been a while we talked about what is the state of the economy, which is what should be of interest to all of us. Because at the end of the day, everyone we vote in, whether it's a president, a governor, members of the National Assembly or the legislative houses in the state assemblies, is about managing our commonwealth for the good of all. Paul Alaje is my guest, joining us from our Abuja studios. He's an economist and chief economist at SPM Professionals. Dr. Paul, thank you so much for coming on the program.
Thank you so much for having me, sir.
Dr. Paul, let's begin with, there's a story I was supposed to catch up with. Maybe I'll bring that story up in just a moment. So if my producer can get me a story where the Senate had actually written to the National Assembly over some new borrowings to the tune of about, I think, 1.5 or so trillion naira domestic borrowing. In just a moment, I want you to take a listen to the Deputy Speaker when he was speaking about it, and I'll throw my questions to you in just a moment.
Committee recommend that the House of Representatives do approve the President. Committee recommend that the House of Representatives do approve the President's request to establish a 1,150 billion naira borrowing program in the domestic debt market to close the unfunded deficit gap created by the increase in the budget size over and above the prior approved revenue and borrowing plan.
Dr. Paul, you heard the Deputy Speaker talking about that new borrowing. So let's start from there before we get to what the UN has published as some worrying signs in terms of food security, which is one of the big conversations we want to have. Now, the president had said non-oil revenue we've hit non-oil revenue target as at August. And I remember that time when I was interviewing you, you said we needed to see some of the real numbers to be able to make some informed decision. But of course, revenue, the way it is designed is such that there's oil and non-oil. Oil is the bigger chunk because our foreign exchange, and non-oil, if we hit that, so crowding out effect is reduced in our domestic market. But so when people hear the president saying in August, we've met non-oil revenue target, we don't need to borrow domestically again, and now we're seeing this new domestic borrowing. What exactly is the signaling we're getting here? Help us understand what is playing out here.
Thank you so very much for having me. I think the communication was not quite clear, and I understand that the people communicating for the president in the presidency had gone out, some on social media, to provide clarity to our context to what the president meant at the time. Here is the point. I think as of the time when the president meant members of his political family, the CPC, he mentioned to them that the revenue component of the 2025 budget has been met. That's a revenue target. Recall that 2025 budget has capital expenditure, recurrent expenditure, then revenue. The remainder, which is the gap, is what should be funded with debts. Now, the ones that government mentioned that the target has been met, which is for non-oil sector, I think is what the president referred to, revenue that came in for FRS, and we have also seen publication of FRS that significantly they've surpassed the targets that they set. But that does not in any way mean, after clarity has been provided, that over 40 trillion naira has been generated, amount that is that the federal government, and I say that carefully, the federal government should have for the 2025 budget. So that is not what it meant. Now, talking about the debt, well, debt is neither good nor bad. There is no good nor bad in the debt. It is what you do with it. For 2025, we have seen a number of requests from Mr. President to the Senate and to the House of Representatives to grant him the right to borrow money. Recall that earlier in the year, the President has gone to, at a joint session of the Assembly, had mentioned that he will borrow money to finance his budget. This perhaps may be what the President is following up through in order for him to get loans. But the question is to do what? And what will be the impact of debt? There are three standard rules when it comes to borrowing for a nation. The first one is stock. And for the sake of analysis, we say for someone to give birth under normal circumstance, I know the word is so turned upside down, under normal circumstance, you should be a woman. So it's a necessary condition. Now, being a woman does not mean one will give birth. All other parameters should be taken care of, which is now sufficient condition. So let me bring it to the context of our conversation today. When we talk of debt and a nation, we look at debt to GDP. Nigeria is in a relatively comfortable position. After we rebase our economy, we are doing around 39%, and the benchmark is about 40%, and I think Nigeria can even accommodate 45%. But all of those do not really have significant impact until we check the second one, which is debt service to revenue. For Nigeria, debt service to revenue is slightly below 70%. Before now, it was 98%. But what should we target? The target for economics around the world, and I'm not talking of people running political economy, I'm talking of what the standard is 33.3%. What does that mean? 1/3 of a national revenue or a federal revenue or a state revenue, it should be the maximum amount we devote to debt service. Because the remaining 66% have assignments recurrent expenditure and capital expenditure. The earlier we get to this point, the better we don't discuss loans that will not impact on the economy. And I haven't mentioned impact. That is the third and the most significant. What is the impact of debt? This is how you know. And for those who are not economists, but they are watching us in their offices, they are watching us in their factories and in their homes and in restaurants, or they are watching us anywhere now. This is how you know. You check. Anytime a budget is presented, you look at that budget revenue. Can it satisfy 100% the recurrent expenditure? Once you have any gap, that tells you that we are going to borrow that year to finance consumption. When you now look at the capex, which is capital expenditure, there are administrative capex. We need to also remove it and stay with core infrastructure, which includes rails, which includes roads, which includes a power supply and every other infrastructure. This is what economists encourage that we borrow for, because we might not be sufficient in bringing money to run all of this. We have a lot of gap in our infrastructure. On road alone, we have over 100 billion. Our budget has been an average of $35 to $40 billion annually. But what we need to spend in the next 10 years is about 100 billion. We are seeing work going on in Abuja, we are seeing part of Lagos, but some other states, a few other states, I think about 11 more, have started to inject more into their economies. But most states are not doing what we are seeing, even though they are trying, but there is nothing so different from the pattern of investment in those states. Meanwhile, hunger is increasing, poverty is increasing, according to the World Bank. So it's important for us to say that if we must borrow, we must invest all the money borrowed 100% in infrastructure. In fact, my advice will be borrowing should be investment targeted. For instance, Nigeria wants to build double carriage road of 40 kilometers. This is the amount we need to build the road. It should not just be a budget item. When we say that we want to borrow, say, 5 trillion naira, the projects that the borrowing we go for, whether in MTEF or in budget, should be clearly stated. After perhaps engineers has given us estimate or QS has given us estimates, that is what we should spend on. And until we do that, there are times where part of these monies will still be going into consumption instead of investment. And what builds a nation? It's investment, not just consumption. Yes, consumption is okay, but let's make the money locally to consume. But if we must borrow at all, because of incidence of borrowing, and what is the incidence of borrowing? It's service. When you borrow to a point, then to a point that is large, then you see that debt service, which is where I started from, will start increasing. Revenue you make today might not be sufficient to satisfy debt service. Nigeria got to 98%. I have not seen that in a long time. So one may wonder, we got relief 2005, when President Obasanjo was in office. What happened? That we got ourselves back to a point where we spend 98% of revenue to service debt. Now we have made some gains. We are back in less than 70, but I only hope we will not go back to Egypt.
Dr. Paul, before we leave this issue of borrowing, help Nigerians understand what exactly is responsible for. Now, I know that there was a time Zak Adedeji, who is the FRS boss, was trying to explain to the effect that when appropriation bills are presented before they become budget for a spending limit, borrowing is part of the plan. But the counter argument is, so he was wondering why people are raising concern over borrowing, because he said it's already there, it's in the books. But the argument is to the effect that if 70 naira out of 100 naira was to come from revenue and were to borrow 30, if we make in excess of 90 naira, for instance, hypothetically, why are we still borrowing? That is the layman's argument. So now we have a combination of factors and counter factors. So help us why we still need to borrow. Well, number one, help us understand why the government needs to borrow, if you can explain that to us. All of the wage bills in terms of optimization has been sorted. No subsidies on fuel, part subsidy on electricity, no subsidy on foreign exchange. We're not defending the naira to the best of my knowledge. There's plenty of money going around. They say we've met our non-oil revenue target for the year. But on the contrary, we've not met. We met our OPEC quarter in July. So the last 3 months, we've not been able to meet. I think we just did 1.4 last month. We did 1.3 the other month, as against 2 million barrels. And now I just checked, oil is about 63 or so, Brent crude, which is in shortage of almost $13, as against our $75 per barrel estimation and assumption. So do you think is what is playing out in the externalities is what is affecting the government to go back to borrowing, or is just maybe poor management?
Okay, a number of factors. So the day revenue is made is not the day it's available to be spent. So a lot of agencies of government, including immigration, custom, FRS, they are all working, making money. In fact, central bank also makes some kinds of money. When all of these come, they don't come if today is 1st of January. So the day they make the money is not exactly available that same day most of the time. Then government make a lot of revenue from our budget estimate where we do about 2 million barrels a day. There is a price which is far below what we are doing now. So the day we extract oil and we sell it, it's not the same day money. It does not work like that. So there is a little bit of gap. Now we might have borrowed for that short gap. So government may quickly raise treasury bills for a short period of time, and in some cases bond, and so on and so forth. So we see that interplay because government wants to quickly fill some gaps. So but that's understandable. Such loan is very momentary, it's very short, because the day revenue is available is not the day, the day revenue is realized is not the day it's available. There seems to be a little bit of gap. So in reconciling that, we might have a stopgap, in this case, revenue that is borrowed to quickly settle the bill while that happens. But at the end of the year, when we are balancing the book, we expect it to balance. We expect that such loans should have been paid. We expect that it will not count as loan anymore because it has been realized and it has been settled. The challenge we have is that when the Debt Management Office publishes new books, it now reveals that our debt profile has increased. In fact, as of this morning, the information we're gathering, I think that needs to be confirmed, is that debt profile has increased to about 193 trillion naira. My projection when I spoke with your colleague Kayode and I think you Kayode and I think Bukola, when I was in what's it called, Katowice in Poland earlier in the year, was that Nigeria may get to 200 trillion naira debt profile by before the next election or by next election. So if the report I'm getting, which is subject to confirmation, because what I have as of June was 150 trillion naira. If we already have that the same year, that calls for a lot of worries. We need to worry about those. So we need to wait till the end of the year. How much are we able to pay? I don't want to believe that that number is correct until perhaps it is or maybe on the website of the authority.
All right, Dr. Alaje, one of the things I will not forgive myself if we don't talk about is food security or insecurity. And that has to do with this UN naming Nigeria among the 15 other countries as food insecurity hotspot. If you look at some of the parameters or drivers they gave, from conflict, economic shocks, extreme weather, I even added insecurity to this. Is this a fair assessment of our situation by the UN?
Well, there's a high level of insecurity going on, especially in some parts of Nigeria. As a researcher, I often travel to some parts, and we also get reports from our partners. I can tell you that there is a lot of school. I think Nigeria is suffering from maybe acute food insecurity. We cannot say that it has gotten to the extreme, but what we have is significant enough as a reasonable number of people, millions of people, are currently suffering from that. Of course, this is not new, but the potency of it now seems to be what we worry about. Nigeria has also never, in recent history, had, we have not seen a number of poor people increase sporadically to 139 people, according to World Bank, using single authority World Bank, giving us that kind of number. I think we've not seen this in the last 5 years, according to the World Bank, saying Nigeria has gotten into. So what do we do? Does this reflect on what World Bank is saying? Yes. If that is what Bank is referring to, then if that's what UN, I beg your pardon, is referring to, then that will make sense. That we have some concerns, which of course includes the impact of insecurity, the impact of conflict, because when you see conflict between two communities, whether it is elder or farmer, the farmers, of course, most of the time will run, and we now have to carry out operation to stop those who are killing one another or each other, as the case may be in the community. We have abandoned one thing. We have abandoned agricultural process, which of course will lead to output and help us reduce the impact of food scarcity or food insecurity in Nigeria. The question many will ask is that if we are having this, how are we now reporting that food inflation is reducing? Well, that's another conversation entirely, because yes, we cannot be saying that food is getting scarce, and food is getting scarce going to the farm, there are conflicts, but we are reporting that there is reduction in food inflation, especially when we look at it year on year or month on month. Then we know that there are a number of these factors which of course can be discussed. But here is the point. We need to promote programs to ensure that not just that those in IDP go back to their location, areas that are relatively safe, they have arable land, and we need to redirect efforts in terms of improving farm output. And that should be done almost immediately. I give you an instance. You are in Lagos, I'm in Abuja. If you travel from Lagos to, say, for instance, another part of Southwest, Ile-Ife, and on your way, when you leave some relatively developed area in Lagos to Shagamu, you see bush by both sides. What are we doing with those bushes over there? Can we convert them to farm output? And I've mentioned to some of your colleagues in other shows that we have 250,000 people. They are core members. We have others. Government have access to resources. They have access to human resources. Brilliant. Even those that have not even finished university. Can we organize farms? We can call this farm any name. It can even be the name of president. Organize specifically for its administration. Ensure that we provide security and make it thousands of acres, such that food output that are good for the soil, maybe in Zamfara, in Ibadan, in Imo, anywhere. You know, the president has most of the governors now. This is the conversation that should be happening at the federal executive sessions, that provide federal government with XYZ number of land, government will provide seedlings in support of the local farmers, and those who don't have job. Do not look at the unemployment number to just determine. Look at youth unemployment number, then put them together, organize ourselves, then we can have improved food output. Some of these seedlings only take 3-4 months or 6 months as the case may be. Dr. Paul. Then we have output, then we can go back to a bomber harvest.
Yeah, I'm sure it's an ongoing conversation as far as the economy is concerned. We'll get to talk about some other time when we'll talk about the dropping number in inflation as against the lived-in reality of the people, and balance it out at the end. Paul Alaje is a chief economist at SPM Professional. Dr. Paul, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Just before I go, I just want to show you preparations. The People's Democratic Party preparations for their convention the weekend. I told you it's just a total conundrum. So that's Ibadan, the Oyo State capital. For the pro-convention, preparations are already on, setting up, and all the people at the back end, you know, people trying to set up for that convention. So you're hearing it will hold, it will not hold, depending on who you're listening to. So that's just an update as far as the PDP National Convention is concerned. Apparently, the pro-convention people are going ahead despite whatever the others are saying or the judgment. Okay, that's it on the program. Thank you so much for your time and your usual company. I'm Jeffrey Uzongo. You've been served on Lunchtime Politics. Bye-bye.